So if you're a U.S. taxpayer and you have any kind of investment income, interest, dividends, when you're doing your 1040, you're going to need this schedule, right? So Schedule B, interest and dividends, it's pretty straightforward, but there's a couple of things I want to highlight here that are a bit nuanced that I see from time to time, but it's really important that you get them right. So for this return, it's going to be just a sample return. We've got John Q. Taxpayer up here, so we've got a couple of the pages. So first page of the 1040, everybody's familiar with that. So if you skip down to your interest and dividend Schedule B, we can go through some of these items. So yeah, again, some of this is very, very straightforward. If you've got any kind of interest income, regular bank interest, things like that, they just get listed here in Part 1. So, you know, Bank of America here. So John Q. Taxpayer has a Bank of America savings account, and in that account for the year, here in $12, right? So Bank of America sends him a 1099 INT at the end of the year, which reports the $12 in interest, and obviously it's got their name and info on there as well. So in this one, John also had a Capital One bank account, right? So Capital One, they have savings account products for you know, their customers as well. So in this one, he had a little bit more interest, $500 for the year. And then again, in this one, Charles Schwab is his broker, right? So he's got a brokerage account with Charles Schwab. And within that account for the year, $205 in interest. So again, pretty, you know, nothing too unique here. But for this example, I want to highlight nominee interest, right? So it is possible, and it happens quite frequently, for taxpayers to have accounts open that are in their name, and the reporting is done under their name and their social security number, but the interest isn't theirs, right? They've opened the account on behalf of somebody else, perhaps a family member, and so the interest is actually due to that person. So if you find yourself in that situation, you're still required to report the interest. So we're taking the position that the Capital One interest of $500 is nominee interest. So you still have to report the $500 because they sent you a 1099, right? It's under your name, your social security number. So you report the full amount. Otherwise, the IRS's matching program might flag it and you'll get a notice. So you still report the interest, but then you have a second line item down here under the subtotal where you enter the amount that's the nominee distribution to the other individual, right? So 717 in total interest reported to you, and then you back out the $500. So the 217 is what's actually taxable to you. Another thing to highlight, you know, this reporting in Part 1 is taxable federal interest only. So, you know, if you have, let's say he has in his Charles Schwab account, he has some investments in municipal bonds, right? So municipal bond interest is generally not subject to federal income taxes. So you wouldn't report that interest here. But it does still get reported, right? So it gets reported on page 1. Page 1 here, we have tax-exempt interest income. So he had $31 in interest in his return for the year, and again, it's reported here and not on Schedule B. And you notice here that it doesn't foot across, right? So you report it here, and it's purely just kind of informational. The taxable interest still remains the amount that was reported as that subtotal on Part 1 of Schedule B. Okay. Another thing to note with the municipal bonds, if you have investments in municipal bonds that are private activity bonds, right? So private activity bond interest is still generally not subject to federal income taxes as long as it's a qualified bond. But the interest, again, doesn't get reported here. Private activity bond interest is basically an add back for AMT purposes. So in this example, you know, of that 30 some odd dollars in exempt interest, he also had $8 in private activity bond interest. So where would you see that? It wouldn't be here. It wouldn't be on page 1. It would be on 6251 when you're doing your AMT, right? If it does apply. So line 2G here, we have the interest from specified private activity bonds, exempt from regular tax, but they're added back for AMT. Okay. Okay, so moving on from interest, go to dividends. So Part 2, ordinary dividends. Also kind of straightforward, similar to Part 1. You're just reporting the source of the dividends, or who did the reporting for you, and then the amounts, right? So in this example, we're also saying that John Q. Taxpayer, the taxpayer here, had his own C corporation, right? So he has a Delaware C corp, and during the year, after the C corp paid taxes and it's filed its tax return, it distributed a dividend to John of $2,500, right? So he reports that all the same, just as if he bought Apple stock or Tesla or something like that, and it was reported to him. It goes down on Part 2, line 5, right? So he reports his closely held corp there, the amount of dividend, and that's it. National Financial Services, so that's the broker-dealer for Fidelity. So for those of you familiar with that, you see Fidelity's consolidated 1099 at the end of the year, but the payor is actually National Financial Services. So in this case, he had $201 of ordinary dividends, and he put that down in Part 2. Okay, so one thing to really, really be careful with is Part 3, right? So it says here in the note, if line 6 is over $1,500, you must complete Part 3. I would always recommend completing Part 3 anyway. And so here's why. So the IRS is really, really hamping down on taxpayers that have foreign financial accounts and they're not properly reporting those interests. Right? So whether it's a foreign bank account or you have a foreign brokerage account, let's say you've got a brokerage account with UBS in Switzerland, you're very likely going to have to report those assets on either an FBAR or a Form 8938. And so this is kind of like the first, line of defense with at least making taxpayers aware of these reporting obligations, right? So you look at foreign accounts and trusts, at any time at the end of the year, did you have financial interest or signature authority over a financial account in another foreign country, right? So if you don't, then just go down the list, right? Just say no. Like if you really don't have any interest in foreign assets, then you can clearly mark no. And that makes it very clear to the IRS that I have no foreign interests and I don't have any of these other reporting obligations. But, just reading through the forms, it brings to taxpayers' attention that, hey, look, okay, maybe I do have one. Maybe I just didn't even think about it. This is happening a lot in the crypto space. A lot of these custodians and intermediaries abroad are foreign companies, because the U.S. companies haven't really caught on to that yet. So a lot of people are finding that they have foreign financial assets through crypto investments. So again, very, very important to read these items, answer them correctly, and if you do find that you have foreign accounts, then as it says here, if yes, you might be required to do an FBAR. And the same thing with a trust, right? If you have a foreign trust and you receive the distribution, you might have an additional filing obligation, right? A Form 3520 filing obligation. So, yeah, I think that's the main thing I want to highlight here is missing those filings. So these Part 3 brings it to your attention. If you miss FBARs or you miss 3520s, the penalties are severe. Even if there's no income going into those accounts, just not reporting the asset itself can subject you to some pretty severe penalties. So, Schedule B can be pretty straightforward, but be very, very careful to look at Part 3 and make sure you understand the questions being asked here. And if you're answering yes to any of these, you might have some additional filing obligations. Okay, that covers it. Thank you for listening and watching, and please give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks.